Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning also to everyone joining us from all over the world. My name is Tina, and it's my honor to welcome you to today's webinar on behalf of the CEIBS Alumni International Chapter. Today we have the pleasure of hosting a very special lineup of speakers, but before you meet them, allow me to say a few words about our chapter as the host of this webinar. The CEIBS Alumni International Chapter, known by many as CEIBS, is the English-speaking home base of CEIBS alumni. Our mission is to bring together the international CEIBS community, which includes friends of CEIBS, of course, and I know we have several of you with us here today. So as a chapter, our goal is to facilitate knowledge sharing and to organize activities of common interest, which may be best described with our school's motto, China Depth, Global Breadth. In fact, today's webinar is a great showcase of just that. You will meet a top expert of international business in China, a key member of CEIBS faculty, and one of our very own alumni, all delivered to you from here in China and in English. And against all odds, still on Zoom, who would have thought? Now there's one more gentleman with us here today who personifies all that we as a chapter could wish for. He possibly knows every student who has ever set foot on campus. He makes sure the world keeps up to date with our school's achievements, and he has become the anchorman of many a successful knowledge sharing session. I'm pleased to hand over to him to introduce our speakers and to take the lead of today's discussion. Please welcome our moderator, CEIBS MBA Marketing Manager, James Kent. I will see you again at the end of the webinar to announce today's lucky winners. And with this, over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Tina. Thank you for that very warm introduction. It's very much my honor to moderate this evening's session, partly as my role as marketing manager, but also as a fellow CEIBS alumni, having completed the DLDP program last year. So warm welcome to everybody, especially those who maybe got stuck in the rain in Shanghai today, as we've had quite a downpour here. In this evening's session, we will have a panel discussion followed by a Q&A. Just some ground rules, first of all. If you have any questions during the upcoming 40-45-minute panel discussion, please feel free to write them in the chat box. Alternatively, if you'd like to ask your question live to our panel, then please raise your hand, the button that's in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen after we finish the panel, and hopefully we'll be able to come to you in due course. So this evening we have, I think, over 70 years of Frontline China experience, on display as part of this webinar. And so let's welcome our panelists, as teased by Tina. First of all, we have two of our own. We have the authors of China CEO 2. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Juan Fernandez, who many of you will know. He's part of our OB faculty here at China Europe International Business School. Until very recently, he was my boss, and as MBA Director and Associate Dean for the program. Welcome, Professor. Next up, we have Mrs. Laurie Underwood. Laurie, as Tina said, is one of our own. She graduated from the MBA program at CEIBS in 2003. Now she serves as Senior Associate Professor of Management at Xi'an Jiaotong Liverpool University's Business School in Suzhou, and is also a Senior Consultant for Sino Associates. Welcome, Laurie. Last but not least, we have maybe somebody that's a new face and a new name to many of our audience this evening. I'm honored to welcome Mr. Mats Harben, mainly because he is joining us from a quarantine hotel in Beijing. But just as importantly, he is the president of Scania Group China and has had 28 years of experience on the ground here in China. And previously, he served as the president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce for China. So let's get into it. Mats, if you don't mind, first of all, I will start with the co-authors of China CEO 2. Laurie, I'll come to you first, if that's okay. You've recently written, published, delivered, a very broad book with very up-to-date insights from a host of CEOs in China, and some really fascinating insights. I guess my first question is, why now to release China CEO 2?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, James. So Juan and I, this is actually our third book that we've written together. We met when I was a student at CEIBS in 2002. And we started working on the first China CEO book, which was published in 2006. And the premise of that book was to interview people who had the name card CEO, China for 20 big multinational companies. It was a great experience. And when the book came out in 2006, there weren't that many other China business books on the market. So we went along for several years, and our publishers started asking us to do a new version of China CEO 2 about 5 years ago. But it took us some time to be convinced that there was still a need for such a book. So when we started, I mean, obviously China has changed a lot since 2006, that was clear. But our question was, are multinational companies and the people running them still making mistakes in China? So to find out whether we needed a new book, we started by doing interviews. And the first person we interviewed was Kenneth Yu, who he's actually the only CEO who's in both China CEO 1 and 2. In the original book, he was the CEO China for 3M. And in the new book, he's still a consultant with Goldman Sachs. So we asked him, Kenneth, do you think that there's a need for a new China CEO book? He's actively in the business of advising companies and executives in China. And he said, yes, people are still making mistakes. Some of them are different from the ones that people were making in 2006, but there's still plenty of content to put a book together to give people advice on how to work in China, how to run big operations. So we were convinced after doing the first interview with him, and we went on to interview 25 people having the name card China CEO, and put all of their advice into the new book.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laurie. Professor Huan, anything to add?
Yeah, I would like to share with you a story about our first and second book. In the first book, I interviewed Jean-Luc Chéreau. Jean-Luc Chéreau was the president of Carrefour China at that time. It was the year 2005. He became president of Carrefour China in 1999, and he was in the position until 2012, almost 13 years. And he was a kind of a pioneer. It's interesting because many of the people that we interviewed for our first book was this type of person, pioneers. They came to China, opened the operations, sometimes alone, and from a hotel room, they started from zero. When Jean-Luc Chéreau joined Carrefour as president, Carrefour at that time only had 14 stores in the country. Then in my first interview, with him, I asked him, what is your strategy in China? And he said, growth. We plan to open a Carrefour every 2 weeks. It was the time, those years, that when one wanted to go to Carrefour during Chinese New Year was almost impossible, because there were cars, was traffic jam, the shop was completely packed with people. And he even told me that there are some Chinese, they went to the store to take pictures, so to learn from Carrefour. That was in 2005. In 2019, I interviewed Thierry Garnier. Thierry Garnier was the president of Carrefour at that time. A very brilliant person. I was really impressed by him. And I asked him the same question that I asked to Chéreau, the first CEO. Between Garnier and Chéreau, there was another CEO, another president of Carrefour. So I asked Garnier, what is your strategy in China? And he told me, restructuring. Now, I asked him, what do you mean by that? And he said, I have to close 100 Carrefour stores in this year. And he also told me all the plans they have to do to restructure the store, reduce the size of the store by half, increase the offerings in entertainment, restaurants, clothing. So convert the Carrefour Center into a mini mall. And he also mentioned digitalization. He was at the time talking with several Chinese platforms to become Carrefour more digital. Now, 2 months after our interview, it was announced that Carrefour was out of China. They sold all their operations to the Chinese chain Suning. Suning, by the way, has around 9,000 stores in China, in the country. So what happened between the first Carrefour and the third Carrefour, the third president? From a very successful business to a company that basically has to leave China because they didn't have more business. And the president of Carrefour China, Monsieur Garnier, I think was very clear when he told me this, and it appears in the book. The signals to change were very strong, especially in digital. What nobody expected is that my competitors would be the guys working with computers. So basically, they were expecting competitors, other food chains or supermarket chains, no guys with computers. And he added, when everything is going well, we become arrogant. But it's precisely when everything is going well, when one must be ready for the future. Otherwise, you have to prepare for the future when you are in trouble. And what are the changes in China in this 14 years period? 3 types of changes. Customers. The Chinese consumer has become more sophisticated and more demanding. Competitors. Chinese competitors learn very fast, are very agile, and now they are innovating. And the third one is the digital. In the last 5 years, China has went through a digital revolution, has changed the country almost totally, and is more advanced than many countries in the West, that's for sure. And that is the reason we both wrote this book. And many of the things that I'm telling here explain why those things happen.
Thank you, Professor. So to summarize briefly, so the changes between the books, new business models, new competitors, new mistakes that CEOs are making. Laurie, I don't know if you had any other comments. If not,
yeah, I think the only other thing I would mention that really stands out as a difference between the first book and second book is, and it relates a little bit to an HR issue, is that you know, there was a big change. There's more of a generation gap now than there was before, and that relates to, you know, changing priorities of the young generation of Chinese. That's more extreme than it used to be, and part of that links into digitization. That young people tend to be more enamored with the local digital heroes than they are with multinational companies. So it all kind of plays in together, but it's a different factor, a new challenge that wasn't there for the first book.
Fantastic, thank you, Laurie. And Matt, if I could just bring you into the conversation now, would you like just to share with us, I guess briefly, you know, some of the fundamental changes that you've seen in your years of 28 years of experience in China?
Oh, you're still on mute, Matt.
Am I?
Now we can hear
now?
Yes.
Yeah,
perfect.
no, I think that the 3 things mentioned are, of course, also my observations. But what I would like to add to this is that we are now entering a period, and this is very different from before, where the government is pushing compliance. And it's doing so because it realizes that it's only by forcing companies, Chinese and foreign, to compete more on equal terms that it can force its own companies to become more efficient and more innovative. And I think this is coming as a surprise to many companies who are used to that, we've had new rules and regulations and standards over the years, and it didn't matter. But this time around, it does matter. And it means that you need to adjust to this new environment, which short term, before you have increased your efficiencies, will drive costs. And I think this is an opportunity for companies that are already compliant and efficient to move ahead in the China market. So I think this is extremely fundamental, and this in a way goes contrary to what we hear in the public debate about China playing unfairly. Yes, it has done so, but by enforcing rules and regulations strictly in China, it is completely changing the competitive landscape in a way that will have far-reaching consequences for all actors in this market.
Thank you, Matt. So I'm going to stay with you if that's okay. The next question that I wanted to talk about was a trend in China's CEO2 that is really the rise of China's domestic champions, and I really like the way that Laurie put it, kind of local digital heroes that that people are following now. From your experience of being a CEO in China and seeing the rise of competition from domestic players, maybe you could just share some of your observations on that trend and what you see coming in the future.
Well, China is a hugely competitive market, and add to that you have also a lot of very ambitious people, young and mid-age, who want to do a good job. So it means that the number of brilliant people that are active in private companies, but also state-owned companies are so many. And when you put them together and working as teams, and when they realize what is needed to compete on the international stage, using new technologies that are coming in, you get some really strong developments in China. So it's not a surprise to me that we now on the Fortune 500 list have more Chinese companies than US companies. And we used to think that, well, China was producing products that were sort of half good quality and not top-notch technologies. I think that's already way of the past. And this is driven, of course, by their own ambition, but also by a much more demanding consumer and industrial customer. So, and these developments have come so quickly that I think that many of us foreign actors in the market have not really almost caught up with this quick change and fundamental change.
If I may add something to this, James.
Please do.
I just came from teaching a program to Ping An. It's the insurance financial company. And I look at the Fortune 500 global and discover that Ping An is now the number 12 most profitable company in the world. Just going to what Matt was saying, yeah? So you have these companies that 5 years, 6 years ago were far away from that ranking, and today are part of the top. And one thing that I'm always surprised when I teach to Chinese companies is very often they start the day singing the company song. Ping An does the same, yeah? They stood up, they put the company song, everybody like with a hand in their hearts and singing the song. They have this discipline, this commitment to the company, to the organization, that is amazing for me, yeah? And the pace in which they are digitalizing Ping An, and this is just an example, yeah? I use Ping An because I was there a few hours ago. It's so fast. They are so open to this innovation in the organization. That is amazing.
And if I may add, and what this means is that any company that is successful in China, be it a Chinese company or a foreign company, if they run the operation in the right way, they generate so much profits or economic muscles that they can use that also to restructure the market outside of China.
Yeah.
So this means that actually it's an existential issue for companies to have a strong foothold in the China market. no other market looks like China today because of its huge population.
And this is very true. I'm sorry for, but I put there before the example of Carrefour. You know what has happened to Carrefour in China? They were not able to succeed, to change at the same pace as the Chinese were changing. Now my question is, will that happen to them back in Europe one day? If they have not learned the lesson in China, will they pay the price later in Europe? And perhaps another company, not Chinese, but another country could take them out of the market. So this is a big question, yeah?
It is a big question, and maybe we can come back to that in the discussion, the Q&A at the end, Professor. I think there's a lot that we can unpack from that. Just to go to you, Laurie, obviously, you know, the rise of the domestic players, it did play a part in the first book, but then it's such a more prominent part of the second book. Apart from what Mats and Professor Huans have covered, do you see kind of any other drivers or anything else that kind of adds to that conversation?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that was different in talking about Chinese competitors between the first and second book is the maturation of innovation. So when we were doing interviews for the first book, people were already in 2005, were already talking about the fact that Chinese competitors were fiercely, you know, improving at a fierce rate. But there was still an edge that most MNCs had in terms of true innovation. China was still, back for the first book, seen as manufacturer of the world, a strong competitor on price, improving in quality, but people were not saying that Chinese companies were innovative. But today it's a totally different story, as Mats was saying. They're innovating in products, they're innovating in services, and they're even innovating in whole business models. They're just coming up, they're just creating a whole new way of doing business. And I think that one of the interviews that made the strongest impression on me was with the China CEO of Microsoft, Alain Crozier, who really explained that across the board, you know, from AI to drones to, you know, Internet of Things, in every aspect that Microsoft is working on, Chinese companies are innovating at a very fast rate. And his main message in the book, and a message that he wanted to send back to the United States, is that, you know, China should be seen as a place where things are happening first in the world that can be replicated in other countries. So even in Microsoft, they're doing things in China first and bringing those back to the US and to other more mature markets. So that's a huge change between the two books.
Fantastic. And maybe we can stay on the topic of innovation, and Professor Huan, I'll come to you. Really, from the second book, we see, you know, two types of innovation, both incremental, but also true innovation in China. Maybe, you know, amongst Chinese companies, maybe you can explain a little bit more about this.
I think that Chinese are very good at incremental innovation, adapting new ideas, improving the production, manufacturing processes, new business models. I think they still have a long way in the area of basic innovation. You know, the research type of innovation. The Scandinavian countries are very strong on that. Some European countries are very strong. US is very strong on that. I think China still have a long way in that part. And the fact is that a country the size of China has very few Nobel Prizes. Compared to the population of China, you should have more Nobel Prizes, which is basically this idea of, I'm talking about science Nobel Prizes, not literature. Or this part of China is still behind the rest of the world. But in other areas, as Laurie said, Matt said, China is going so fast. And also because the market is so hungry for novelty and adapt those novelties much faster than in other countries, yeah?
Thank you, Professor. I wonder if we could bring Mats in on that. Do you agree with Professor Huan, Mats, in terms of the, I guess, kind of, you know, China's status in terms of innovation? Do you see it being similar, mainly incremental, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree that when it comes to basic research, or when it comes to basics in general, China is not where it should be. And the contradictory thing about China is that the leadership and the consumers, they're all wanting to have the best and the most advanced technologies, but they are neglecting paving or building the foundation. And if we go back to regulation, and if we go back to my industry, the truck industry, we see that China is now able to produce vehicles that are approaching international level. At the same time, we have a legislation that does not control how vehicles are used on the roads. Simple things like reflexes, so you can see the vehicles on a dark road, for example. And I think that is sort of a fundamental thing that means more to road safety than the most advanced technologies. And this, I think, is just one example of how I see things working out in society in general, that you use the most high-tech solution to solve issues that actually can be solved by very simple implementation of basic rules and regulations. This is the big contradiction in China. And I think that that's why this enforcement of rules and regulations can be so important, because if it is done properly, it will mean that China will also turn attention to the basics, and that may then also pave the way for sort of basic research and the more, for us, common sense things that need to be in place.
I just wonder on that note, Matt, do you see a timeline for that, or when do you think that kind of enforcement of regulations will be, as you say, a prominent part of, say, China CEO 3? Or when do you see that really taking hold in China?
I think it is happening right now, and it's accelerating. In some areas, it's going quicker than in others. I think in the field of the environment, maybe it's moved the fastest. But even there, we see that sometimes the solutions to problems are too advanced instead of using basics. And I think this is a contradiction. China wants to be ahead, be in the front line of the world, and it neglects building the basics.
Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to change gears a little bit. Another trend from the book was obviously centered around China's changing place in the world, and I guess with China's prominence on the global stage, what do you see for the future of multinationals in China? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic about the future? And Matt, maybe we can start with you for that question. What's your thoughts on the future of MNCs?
Some years ago, when the stimulus package after the financial crisis 2008-2009 was waning off, which gave a lot of business opportunities to foreign companies, we had the feeling that the golden age for multinationals was over in China. But I am today more convinced that the golden age lies ahead of us, for exactly the reason I just explained, that multinational companies are compliant, are efficient, have strong brands that are trusted by the customers. So I think if they just play the game right, they have a great future ahead of them in China. And actually, it's not only that they have a future; they need to have a future in order to protect their position outside of China, as we talked about just now.
Thank you very much, Laurie. If I could come to you next for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think one thing that's different about multinational companies today is that they're in China maybe for a slightly different reason. For the first book, they were in China because it was a growth period. They wanted to be here to see if they could ride the wave of Chinese economic growth. And now they're here because they have to be in China. They kind of need China more than China needed them. That's the switch maybe between the two areas of the two books. And I think what has changed a lot for multinational companies is that they're no longer, bringing new technology to China, but much more collaborating with the Chinese partners and trying to be part of what's going on in China. So I think it'll be very interesting to see, to go back a little bit to the innovation continuum, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with innovation in China in the coming years. I think my guess is that if we do a China CEO 3, that China will continue, moving from incremental innovation toward more true innovation. And that's going to make it even more important for MNCs to be here, but they'll be here in a much more collaborative role rather than, you know, bringing their expertise to China.
May I just add to that, what we are seeing also are more and more MNCs using China as an innovation center. It is very quick to innovate in China. In the past, it was something you needed to do to maintain your licenses and your market shares. Today you do it because it is very competitive to use China for innovation.
Fantastic. Professor Huan, you on the verge of saying something, please.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. When we talk with these CEOs and we ask them, what do you think of the Chinese government? And they said that, in general, they said it's very business friendly, even better than in other advanced countries. When you have a good business proposition, when they see that it's a benefit for the country, that you are going to bring innovation centers, they open their arms and they support you 100%. But not only in these advanced or technology products, yeah? I remember talking with the president of Coca-Cola China, and he told me, it's fantastic. Every time I go to visit a town, they receive me like if I were the new emperor, because I bring jobs, I bring investment, and they are very welcoming. We are talking about at city level, yeah, or village level. I think that what we hear in the press and all these conflicts that between the US, China, here on the field, I don't think they feel it that strong. Certain companies, of course. I'll give you another example. Microsoft, which is in technology, I don't think they have any problem in China. This discussion between the different digital platforms, a company that Microsoft is very international, they have products that cover the whole world. They are doing a fantastic job in China. And they're doing this because part of the mission in China is to help Chinese companies in the digital transformation. And they're putting a lot of effort on benefiting the Chinese society. I think that when the authorities see that attitude, you are always welcome. In a way, it's not different from other countries, yeah? We want companies invest in our countries to help our companies, to help our societies, and to bring something positive. That's it.
Perfect. Maybe we'll wrap it up with one more question before we open the Q&A. I've also got a couple of my own to sneak in there. But as our audience tonight are predominantly CEIBS alumni, part of our international chapter, what does all this mean that we've discussed today, and also the content of the book? What does this mean for foreign executives that are making their way in China and climbing the career ladder here? And maybe Laurie, if I could come to you first.
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm sure it's of interest to all of our international alumni who are listening. One of the things, we did ask that question to the CEOs, especially to the foreign CEOs that we interviewed. And one of the nice things that we heard is that you know, China is a very important place to work in terms of building an exciting career. So a lot of multinational companies are seeing China as a very important posting for anyone who wants a truly global position. So we even saw several of the CEOs that we interviewed who were CEO China. Then even soon after the interviews, they went on to a global role. Stefan Rinderknich, who is the China CEO of L'Oreal, he did exactly that. So he's now in a VP position for North America. And he gave a nice quote that basically said, every global executive for L'Oreal now has to pass through a China posting in order to go on to that role. We also got confirmation from the head of Korn Ferry for Asia Pacific, Charles Sung, who said the same thing, that he's obviously in recruitment, and said that China is a very important must-have posting for people who are going on to global roles. So for all of us who are working in China, it just means that, you know, our China position is going to serve us very well in our careers.
Thank you, Laurie. And Mats, if you could pick that comment up, I'd also like interested to know your thoughts on the dynamic between the office in China and the head office of Scania. Do you think that the people in the boardroom at Scania would agree that it's important for their executives to, as Laurie says, pass through China on the way up the corporate ladder?
Well, we are beginning to come to that realization. We are still quite the Europe and Latin America centered company. But I think for CEIBS alumni, there is a great opportunity right now in that the image of China that is being portrayed through media in the US, in Europe, in my country, Sweden, means that many people are actually hesitating to work with China-related matters or even move to China. So those who have a more neutral or balanced understanding of what's happening in China sees the opportunities and things long term, I think we'll get ahead of the pack at this very moment.
Thank you, Mats. And Professor Huan.
Well, what can I say? I'm one of those. I moved to China in year 2000. So I've been in China for 20 years. I think Laurie has more or less the same time. I think Mats even longer than me. And I still think that was the best decision in my life. The opportunities that China has offered me, and people like me, a foreigner, how they have received me with the arms open. When you respect the country, respect the culture, respect them, it's a land of opportunities. It doesn't mean that it's easy. You have to find your way, but there are opportunities. At least I think more than in my own country.
Thank you, and thank you to our panel. So I'm going to open up now to the audience. If anybody has any questions, then please raise your hand. Or if you would like to leave a question in the chat box and you're a little bit shy, then I'm more than happy to read it out. I think that whilst I wait for a question to come in, maybe I could just be cheeky and ask, if it was, say, that a China CEO number 3 was on the cards in 10 years, given the wealth of experience between you, I mean, what would the CEO landscape of China, if you had to predict right now, what would the CEO landscape of China look like in 10 years? Laurie, I will start with you.
Okay, well, one thing that I wanted to mention that we haven't brought up yet is the difference in the interviewees between the first and second book, which was really a big difference. So in the first book, we interviewed the China CEO for 20 multinational companies. And at that time, all of them were not Chinese and all of them were men. So we tried to see if there could be more diversity, but at that time, we were not able to find women or Chinese nationals who were in that role. But in the new book, 25 CEOs, 8 of them are ethnically Chinese and 4 of them are women. So I think this trend, if we do China CEO 3, there will definitely be even more Chinese nationals in the top role and hopefully even more women. So, the new book, one big difference is that the advice, we had to make a more complicated structure for the book because the advice, there's 2 different sets of advice. One is for foreigners in the top role, one is for Chinese in the top role of a multinational company. And I think that will, be even more, there'll be even more of that same progression if we go on to the 3rd book.
Great. Professor Huan.
Probably if I have to write with Laurie a 3rd book, I will focus in a different way. I would be more interested to know Chinese multinationals going the other way. Now we are studying multinational companies coming to China, but I think what is growing and is becoming a bigger phenomenon is Chinese multinational going abroad, going to other countries. Now is the beginning. We have some big names, of course, but I think that is a phenomenon that will grow much more in the future.
Okay, thank you, Bert. So more international, more women, and more Chinese for China CEO 3. I think we have a question from the audience. So Letitia, who I believe is part of our Gemba 19 class. Letitia, if you could unmute your microphone and turn on your camera and ask your question. I'm not sure if I can help you to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can unmute. Thank you. Really appreciate all these insights on the China CEO and the failures and the success stories, as well as positive outlook for the foreign companies in China. I was wondering if you could identify any difference between CEO from different countries and or industries, maybe some industries doing better than others. I come from the food industry. That's an example. So just curious about this. Thank you.
Maybe we start with Professor Huan, if that's okay.
Actually, that's a question that we didn't address in the book. Our sample is relatively small. It's only 25 CEOs. And when we select them, we didn't think on specifically in dividing them by industry, was more countries, although there is a nice balance of different industries. The only one CEO or company that was in difficulties was Carrefour. And I think that is an industry that probably is now quite difficult now for foreign companies. I don't know Walmart, but I'm sure that they are not doing as well as before. And other retailers, Tesco, I think they left China. So this is an industry that is quite difficult, quite competitive in China at the moment. New technologies, Microsoft is doing excellent, good way. And all these technology companies, I remember ABB, BASF, the German company, SAP, another German company, they are doing well. Volvo, of course, is not truly Swedish, still managed by Swedish, but part of a Chinese group. That's a good example of a company, Chinese company going abroad. Is doing fantastic. It's a fantastic job. So the only industry that comes to my mind that we covered in the book that was in difficulty was the distribution, retailing, this type of businesses. The others, I didn't have any experience of those that were in difficulties. They were doing well. You agree, Laurie? And
yeah, I think the only thing I could add to that is that, you know, all the companies we tried to talk to, a lot of different companies in different fields, from automobile to Victoria's Secret. We had, you know, big variety. But I think that in general, all of them said that they're facing very fierce competition from local competitors. The only ones, you know, in very advanced sciences, such as Bayer, were saying that they still had a bit of a technological advantage over competitors. But even Bayer was saying that, you know, they're gearing up for competition being head-to-head very quickly. So across the board, it was a matter of constantly innovating, constantly improving, and working hard to maintain position in the China market. Nobody was comfortable.
I think that Matt can add much more than us, because he was president of the European Chamber of Commerce, and Matt knew a lot of different businesses. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I think in this in all industries there are opportunities, but with this increasing competitiveness as we're talking about, I think one key factor for success in the future will be for the CEO and his management team to be able to be very inspirational, to be leading by visions, and to motivating the staff, because it is with the company with the most motivated staff will be the most successful one. So in the past, maybe we have tended to focus very much on hard issues, but I believe that it's the soft issues that will be the hardest as we move forward. Energizing your organization.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to take a question that came to me in the chat, and I'll work through the others as quickly as I can. So Jade, who's I believe one of our alumni from this year for the MBA, her question is to you, Matt, and you've been in a leadership role in China under different leaders at the government level. She was wondering what your thoughts are on, under the current leadership, how friendly and welcoming do you believe China to be to multinationals, and what are your thoughts on how that will continue for, say, the next 10 years? Do you think it will continue to be a welcoming place for multinationals?
Yeah, again, this is very contradictory to the picture of China that has been rolled out. I think under the current leadership, China has become more open, more deregulated than ever before, probably in China's history. And it will benefit China to continue that opening up. And I'm quite convinced that will exactly happen. China has a government that, on the name of it, is of course a socialist government, but it has fully embraced the market economy, because it knows that if it wants to realize its ambition to make China a superpower by 2049, it needs to rest on a very strong economy. And we all know that a strong economy is the result of a fair competition. So I think that is, again, why China is putting so much focus on improving and modernizing its regulatory frameworks, because that will foster China's strong economy. That said, I think also China needs a crisis to take that next step. We all talk about the middle income trap, and China needs to accept that companies will have to go bankrupt. It has to go through very massive restructuring. It will be painful, but without letting the market forces play out fully and refraining from cushioning a crisis, China may get stuck in the middle income trap. If it allows a crisis to play out, it may come out stronger at the other end. And I think this is what we need to monitor in the next 5 years. And I was hoping that the current leadership would dare to unleash such a crisis. And it is to some extent. We're now hearing more and more reports of companies going bankrupt, but I think we should expect much more of that.
Thank you, Matt. Another question that came in, I think, from Wayne Zhou. Wayne, a very interesting question. Maybe to Professor Huan, this one. Are there any generational differences among China CEOs? Are there any difference or any characteristics that you see differently from CEOs of different generations in China?
Referring to foreign CEOs or for foreign multinationals, I suppose. The CEOs that we interview for the first book, I would call them, as I mentioned in my introduction, the pioneers. Usually, they have a long experience before coming China. In the case of Cheron, the president of Carrefour China, that we interviewed for the first book, before China, he was in Spain, in France, in Brazil, in Taiwan, and then China. And after China, he retired. The president of L'Oréal at that time, he also was in Italy, France, Brazil, and then China, and then he retired. So at that time, that generation of CEOs, what I said, they were the pioneers, very experienced, and basically they were at the end of the careers. People that head office trusted very much. And they were almost like entrepreneurs, open operations, sometimes from zero. Now, the new generation of CEOs that we interviewed for the second book, they were much younger, perhaps in the late 40s, early 50s. And as Laurie mentioned, some of them have China as the stepping stone to a higher level in the organization, perhaps at head office. And we have several cases of this type. After occupying the position in China, they became perhaps presidents of their organizations. I'm thinking now of the consulting firm Very Point. or they want to the board members. I talked with the president of Bayer, Celine, a few days ago, and I asked this question, yeah, and she tells me that now, when she was president of Bayer, she has to deal with people in head office, that high level, that already been in China before. So the new generation of CEOs are younger than the previous one, and they continue their careers to even higher levels in their organization. That's the difference I see between the first and the second group.
Thank you, Professor. Next, a question from JC Abad. This is to everybody, but maybe Laurie, I'll come to you first. JC is asking about the automotive industry. Is it mostly bad news? Obviously, overcapacity. Where is it heading? And I know in the book, I believe you spoke to the CEO of Maserati. But yeah, any trends or any insights from CEOs about the automotive industry that you can share?
You know, automotive industry has been hit with the U.S. trade war. That's certainly one of the industries hit most hard. And unfortunately, you know, since we finished the interviews, that has not improved. So, yeah, I think an industry like auto is very susceptible when there are trade issues, just because it's such an international industry with so many different components. So, yeah, it's not. I wish I could say something very optimistic about that, but probably there's going to be, you know, some challenges ahead before that industry gets back on a more positive note. I did want to add one thing to the previous question about the different generations of CEOs, because I think one important issue between the young generation or the current generation and the past is that among the foreign CEOs in China, another difference is that many of them had more China experience and also better language skills. So that was an interesting change. And the second thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, there are more Chinese CEOs of multinational companies. And so if somebody like Wayne Zhou is thinking about, you know, the possibility for himself to rise to a position as CEO of a multinational company, the advice in the book is basically for Chinese CEOs to make themselves totally bicultural. So that means, of course, language skills, but also really being very comfortable in the home country culture of the company. So I just wanted to mention that, you know, there's two different paths, but that's a very clear difference between the first and second book as well. Anything else that others had to offer about automotive industry? I opened the floor if one wanted to add something.
I think Matt could add more there because he's working for Scania, which is in the industry, although they are not cars, but I'm sure you have an opinion, yeah, about that.
Oh,
Participating industry, because we know for sure that mobility of people and goods will just increase. The question is, how will it be done? Will it be done through automotive, or will it be done through shared mobility? And this is, of course, where new technology comes in, and where China's in the front line of applying new business models and new technologies to create more convenient and more efficient mobility. I believe, however, that the strong European companies will be able to adapt and stay successful in the area of mobility also. And we are seeing that, well, we are owned by Volkswagen, that sales have picked up quite good again after the Corona crisis. Now, this is driven by people wanting to isolate themselves from other people by having their personal cars, a private space. No matter what, mobility will grow. And the one who taps into mobility will have great opportunities.
Thank you, Matt. Another question that came into the Q&A box, it's anonymous, sadly. But Matt, this is one for you, if that's okay. So you mentioned earlier about domestic Chinese companies flexing their economic muscles and reshaping the landscape kind of outside of China. Recently, as noted by the audience member, we've seen today that TikTok's CEO in America has announced his role. Do you see that as a blip in the narrative of Chinese companies building capacity overseas, or do you think that's going to have, I guess, kind of bigger ripples in terms of the rest of Chinese companies going global?
Well, several Chinese companies have been caught up in this global geopolitical conflict, and that will probably continue at least for the rest of this year. But I don't think that you can hold back the force and the energy in China. So I expect that we're going to see more Chinese companies going global and reshaping the one industry after the other. The point I was making earlier is that foreign companies therefore need to make sure that they make as much money in China so that they can use that resources to be one of the leaders of restructuring their respective industries. So China is a key battlefield also to win the global battle.
Perfect. Thank you, Mats. In the interest of time, I'm going to hand back to Tina now. I think the people in the CEIBS pyramid behind me are looking to go home. So thank you very much for everybody for joining us this evening and for the insights from our panel. I'm sorry if we didn't get to you in terms of the questions, but I've made a note of them and I will send them across to our panel following this session, and we'll try to come back to you. So without further ado, Tina, thank you for setting this up, and back to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. After this great session, thanks to all the speakers. And before I take on my final small task of announcing today's winners, I also want to thank the people behind the scenes from the alumni office, especially Lily. Thank you so much for making this webinar happen. Now, the last thing of the day, we have 3 winners to announce. The book that has been mentioned very often throughout this interesting session, China CEO 3. The authors have been so kind to give 3 copies to us that we will give away. And these 3 copies are going to the 8th person who signed up for tonight's webinar and showed up, which is Laetitia Domange, who we also heard earlier when she asked the question. So Laetitia, we will reach out to you to send you a book. Then the other 2 lucky winners, number 28 who signed up and showed up is Wayne Zhou. Congratulations. And then our last winner for tonight, number 88, the lucky winner who signed up and showed up is Wing Wang. Thank you all so much. We will get in touch. We have your emails and send you the book. For all of those who have not won it but would have it, please reach out to Laurie. She will find a way of getting you the book, Laurie Underwood on WeChat. Apart from that, it's also obviously available on some of the main book sales platforms. Okay, I think with that we can conclude. Thank you all so much and have a great evening or rest of the day to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.